Hello and welcome to Catamount Community Connection, your weekly 1-hour program from Catamount Radio. Each week we talk with various community leaders from the business, professional, nonprofit, and political arenas. Our show brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair at Rutland since 1846. I promise we're going to have Robert Congdon on at some point to let us know how things are going to be similar or different at this year's Vermont State Fair. But we are looking forward to the 180th Vermont State Fair here in Rutland in August of this year, and it coincides with the 250th birthday of the United States of America. So a couple weeks ago, we had Representative Chris Pritchard on, and he at the time had decided that he would not be seeking re-election. So I thought it only fair, since he has changed his mind and come to his senses in some regard. He will be running again, that we had him back. We're not going to spend the whole hour. We can spend maybe 15, 20 minutes talking with Chris as to, I think you made it pretty clear. And by the way, welcome back here.
Thanks, Brian.
How you felt when we talked a couple weeks ago. I know there was some pent-up frustration at the way things work in Montpelier. I think those of us who have served all feel that at times. Even for me, 12 years in, I still, on a daily basis, face some frustrations. You got to get through that and work with people and be someone that most people like, I think, in order for you to get anything done. But in the interim, I know from talking to you that day after we got back, that you had sort of, I'm going to call it a groundswell of support from constituents who said, geez, maybe you could think that over again and come to a different conclusion. So I'll let you kind of talk about what happened in the intervening 2 weeks here, but I'm glad that you're running again. I did mention when we talked before, I really do honestly think you're a great representative of those 5 towns. You've done a great job. I know you're on a committee that creates a lot of frustration for you. And there's nothing I can do about that. Every term is different. That chair may be there, may not be anywhere, may be there again. I don't know. But anyway, welcome back, and thanks for your decision to run again.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. Yeah, during my town meetings, I had indicated to people that I wasn't sure that I was going to sign back up, and I was candid with them and explained my, the frustrations that I had. And, just a tremendous amount of people have reached out to me in the last, few weeks and encouraged me, to think about it. So, before I left last Friday, I had a visit with the administration. I was asked to visit with them, and after speaking with them, I had a lot to think about on the way home, and as frustrating as it's been, it's been nice that that there's been more balance there, and I think because of the balance, it's made things a lot more. I think it's made it a lot more productive than what I've heard that it was the last biennium. So I thought about that a little bit. The other thing, quite honestly, I thought about is, I know the governor's tossing around, trying to run again. I'm sure there's not too many more, times that he's going to do that, and this may be the last. And, I have a lot of respect for the governor. I've got to know him better with my time there, and I just think he deserves to get at least the support through the balance that exists there now. If this is going to be his last term, so and then when I got home, I had a long, heartfelt discussion with my wife. I mean, she's a big part of this decision. It's she's made a commitment too, and I wanted her to, I just wanted her to feel good about this, and I think it was important that that she guide me in this decision, and so we came to the conclusion that it would be good to do it to support the governor, and so I'm going to give it one more try. I'm going to reach out to my constituents and ask them if they'll consider allowing me to represent them one more time.
You're right. Balance is such a key element, I feel, in not just a legislative situation, but in life. If you can't balance things, you have a tendency to go down one road, and sometimes it's a really good road, and then all of a sudden it isn't, and sometimes it's not. When I got there, and there's 30 senators, again, I tell people this from time to time, but I'm wondering how many people on the street, if you stopped and said, how many legislators are there anyway in Vermont? I'm not sure a lot of people would know the answer to that. The answer is 180. So there's 150 in the House and 30 in the Senate. When I came aboard in 2014, there were 6 Republicans and 26 either Democrats or progressives in some fashion. Yeah. 24, because 24 and 6 make 30.
Yeah.
And so then we got to 7, and we held 7 for a long time, and it became, as people use the term, supermajority. The House was similarly divided. There were times when it was 50, but then it slipped into the high 40s, and again, a supermajority existed. And I really do feel this way, honestly. If the Republicans were in the driver's seat, so to speak, and had the supermajority, I think an equal number of bad things could happen, because once you get that notion that you have ultimate power and there's nothing that anybody can do to stop it, including a governor who may be on the other political aisle, you don't have a tendency to listen to both sides of the story as earnestly. I felt a lot of times that we were just sort of patted on the head and saying, yeah, we're going to do what we want, but it's nice to hear from you.
Yeah.
You know, so now in the 24 election, things completely changed. And in the Senate, we now have 13 Republicans and the remainder either Democrats or progressives. And in the House, I think you're up to 54, 55, something like that. Yeah. And so if the governor feels strongly about a particular piece of legislation, he can veto it. And he can sustain his veto because it takes 2/3 majority to override it, which is what happened from, 2020 on. There were a total, I think he has the record of most vetoes of any governor in the history of Vermont. And in 1 year, there were 8, and all 8 were overturned. So I can, we talk about frustration. That must have really been frustrating to put your name on a piece of legislation and say no and have it overturned 8 times. So I do think balance is key, and we'll see what happens in the upcoming election.
Yeah. The balance really rung home with me, especially in light of what's transpired lately at the State House. One of the issues that's really come to the forefront of everything is Act 181. And, which is presently in our committee, and we're debating it right now and discussing it. But I thought a little bit about, the importance of balance. And had there been the balance the last session that there is this session, we wouldn't be talking about 181.
Right.
And I think it's important for people, to know that. I mean, there is an incredible amount of rural Vermonters that are concerned about, what now is Senate Bill 325 that we're discussing. They have big concerns of the road rule in Tier 3, and they feel they were left out of that conversation, and so we're going to see where that goes. But there's that's really, for me, I mean, it's really come to the forefront of what we're doing, and it's important that we get it right for these folks.
Yeah, and that was one of the bills that was vetoed by the governor and overridden. I voted no on the original one. I felt the road rule especially was very, very problematic. And then the Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 was also, I didn't really think that was ever going to be an answer to a problem. I understand that, and I would have voted if it were just a couple of provisions. The Tier 1, I don't have any trouble with. Rutland City is going to make out very well with that. Yeah. But if you get beyond that, there's some problems. So at any rate, yeah, that was one of the things that, and I'm probably later in this show going to be speaking with Devin Neary from the Rutland Regional Planning Commission specifically about Act 181. He and I may not see eye to eye on a lot of the different provisions in the bill, but I thought it was only fair that we get his perspective of it. He worked very hard to put together this regional land use plan for the county, and so he can explain it a lot better than I can. But yeah, that was an example of one that I think if the governor had more support back then, Act 181 wouldn't have happened because the Republicans all voted against it, and it just got overturned. We're talking to Chris Pritchard, by the way, and we have him back because when we had him on a couple of weeks ago, he had made the announcement he would not be seeking re-election. He's since reconsidered, and he will be a candidate. I don't think you'll have a primary opponent. I'm not sure about a general election opponent, but that's further down the road. Assuming you are reelected, are you planning to ask the Speaker to stay put in that committee, or do you want to move somewhere else? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. I think I will, I think I do want to stay in that committee. I mean, one of the things that we discuss in that committee that, as you know, is very important to me are the Vermont fish and wildlife issues. Mm-hmm. Those things are in our area of jurisdiction, and I have felt for a long time that that department has been underrepresented and really hasn't had a whole lot of advocates, and so I'm trying to be an advocate for that department. There's a lot of good people there they're doing a lot of good things for all the people of Vermont, and I've learned a lot about TDMLs and the Clean Water Act and a lot of stuff that I wasn't familiar with. So it's made me a lot more knowledgeable on those subjects. And so I think I want to stick with it. I don't want to start all over with the learning process. And I've got, as many people say up there, a lot of this stuff it's like getting this information through a fire hose, and it is, but some of it started to stick with me, and I'm really understanding a lot better these things that we deal with in our jurisdiction.
Have you any idea? There's 11 members on that committee, and by the way, we're talking about the Committee on the Environment in the House. So 11 members. Any idea how many of those have indicated they won't be coming back or will be coming back? I've heard, and again, you hear a lot of stuff up there, and I think until it actually happens, you probably should take it all with a grain of salt. But, I've heard of possibly 2 on our committee that are not going to be returning. Whether they do or not, it's hard to say. I know, we've had a fair amount of people leave the House this year, and a few in the Senate. So, yeah, I don't know. I know the representative from Dorset, Sandy Pincinel, she's actually losing 4 people off her committee at the end of the year. So those 4 people have made the decision not to return, including her chair. Yep.
It's going to be, who knows what the mix is going to be and who's going to step up to take their place. But, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
So each second year of the biennium, we have a picture taken in both chambers. The Senate picture is a little bit easier because there's only 30 of us. So we stay inside. You guys go out on the steps. And the chairs of the committees get to sit, ironically, in chairs in front, and then everybody else is standing. So there was a picture, and there still is, in Senate Transportation back in 2015, or maybe it was 16, but it was a 15-16 biennium. And there's 11 standing committees in the Senate. And I sit on agriculture in the morning and government operations in the afternoon. And of those 11 chairs, only one of them are still there.
Wow.
That's a pretty amazing stat when you think about it. It's 12 years ago. Two of them have passed away, Senator Mazza and Senator Sears.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of the other ones just decided to do other things. So they're not around anymore. They're still involved probably in state government somewhere. But the only one left is Ann Cummings from the Washington district, and she still chairs the Senate Finance Committee. I just thought, and I went and told her that. I said, you should go in and look at that picture. You're like the only one left out of those 11 people.
Yeah.
So we do have turnover every now and then, and let's amaze ourselves at what might happen in 26 here. I have no idea how things are going to go.
Yeah.
We're in a very blue state.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any secret about that. But if we can at least maintain the balance that we've managed to get to, I think things will be good. So I'm glad that you're running. I guess I'm also glad you want to stay in the House Committee on the Environment, because I think that is an important one, and one that affects a lot of different things that maybe people don't realize. I know there are bills left, but this S325, which you're doing now, is one that came over from our side, and it basically makes some adjustments, tweaks, however you want to phrase it, in what was Act 181. And there are deadlines and implementation dates that have been pushed out. That's pretty much all that's happened in that bill. And there are strong feelings, I know, from folks that live in the rural parts of the state that want a total repeal of certain provisions. And then there's others that feel that what we did back in 24, even though I voted against it, was what should happen. So that's always the balance and the tension that you have in the legislature. So,
and it's incredible how quickly the voices of rural Vermont have come together. I mean, there's, they have a Facebook page, Act 181, and a few short weeks ago there was 200 folks on it, and it's it's approaching 10,000 now. It's pretty incredible, and they're organizing, they're talking with each other, and they're trying to get to be part of the process. I had I've gotten quite a few emails regarding the bill in the committee, and I've tried to answer all of them, regardless of whether they were my constituents or not, and they're from all over the state, and I've reached out to one of the folks that's part of this, and trying to get a list of folks that can testify on that bill. We need to have both perspectives, and so far, I mean, we only worked on it through the week, but so far we've only heard from one perspective, and I think it's important that we get everybody at the table and try to make this work for everybody. And
for the most part, at least from what I know about your district, it's fairly rural.
It's gonna be affected by this.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. It's harmful to folks, and we can't let that happen. We need to correct it. Where it ends up at the end of the day, no one knows. But certainly, I know there's a few of our members on our committee that want to see a repeal on Tier 3 and the road rule. There's a lot of good things in Act 181 too. We just need to make it work for everybody, for all Vermonters. And right now, it's not set up to do that.
We're talking to Representative Chris Pritchard, who represents Paulet, Middletown Springs, Wells, Rupert, and Timoth. And he's seeking re-election. And I'm only mentioning that again because 2 weeks ago he said he wasn't. But again, had a groundswell of support. Constituents reached out. The governor actually had a one-on-one with him and expressed his support for him running again. So he has made the decision to come back, should the voters so choose, and represent those 5 towns again. I guess I'll leave it there unless you have anything else to add, Chris.
No. I think that's it, Brian, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do this. I stopped down last week to my town clerk, Deb Hawkins, and picked up my petition and spent a little time this morning and reaching out to people for signatures, and I'm halfway there, so hopefully I'll get that buttoned up soon and get it turned in. I think it's April 25th that we can start to turn them in and move forward from there.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming in today. We're going to take our first break here on Catamount Community Connection. When we come back, hopefully we'll have Devin Neary from the Rutland Regional Planning Commission on with us. And so, again, thanks to Chris Pritchard, and we will be back here on Catamount Community Connection in just a minute. Welcome back to Catamount Community Connection. And we are going to unfortunately have to postpone our chat with Devin Neary. I just got a phone call during the break, and he is under the weather big time. So we will hopefully get him in next weekend to talk more about Act 181. But welcome back to our public affairs program here. It's brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair at Rutland since 1846. We are definitely looking forward to the 180th Vermont State Fair coming up this August. It will coincide rather nicely with the birthday, the 250th anniversary of the United States of America. So instead of talking with Devin, I thought for the next 30 minutes or so, I'd give you a little bit of an outline about what may be left in the legislative session this year and also what has already been accomplished. Maybe it's easier to start with what's been accomplished first. In early 2026, during the legislative session, lawmakers focused on fiscal adjustments, youth justice, and some environmental protection. Key, signed by the governor, included a Budget Adjustment Act, which was H 790, which basically just trues up the budget every year. It does not normally spend any additional revenue, but it is one of those bills that is necessary for the government to continue to operate during the second half of the fiscal year. And that was signed by the governor into law earlier this session. We also have now regulations on synthetic media in elections and also some changes to the youthful offender proceedings. So again, the governor signed the Budget Adjustment Act, the so-called BAA. Also, S-23 was a bill that came out of the Senate Government Operations Committee a year ago, and it regulates the use of AI-generated content in political advertising and campaigns. This was first brought up during the 2024 election in New Hampshire. What appeared to be President Biden in an AI-generated television ad. It really was not the president, but it looked like him and sounded like him, and he urged people not to vote in the Democratic primary that year. And so we felt that we needed to do something, at least to let people know when they are listening to or watching a political ad, which is not what it purports to be. So we did pass S-23 out of the Senate, and the House agreed, and the governor signed that into law as well. And what basically it does is doesn't prohibit folks from making the AI-generated ads, but it does make it illegal to not warn people, but let people know that what they're watching is indeed AI generated and not real. So that was another bill that was earlier signed by the governor this legislative session. Youthful offender proceedings, which update legal procedures regarding youthful offender proceedings in the justice system. It was House Bill 642. That was also signed into law. The clinical decision-making relating to clinical decision protocols also signed into law by the governor. And those are kind of the main things that so far have happened in this legislative session. It has been, from my experience in 12 years being up there, a very quiet legislative session. Not many bills have moved through both houses yet and have been signed into law by the governor. We'll have to wait and see what is coming up. The governor made it very clear in both his State of the Union or State of the State address and also the budget address that he will not sign a budget into law this year unless the educational reform bill has been done by both chambers and presented to him. And so as of April, in other words, as of this month, the Vermont House Education Committee is advancing a proposal. It is all wrapped up in House Bill 955. If you want to look it up, and it pushes for educational reform through voluntary regional collaboration rather than forced school district mergers. The plan aims to cut costs by requiring districts to form what are called CESAs, which stands for Cooperative Education Service Areas. And what would happen there is districts would share resources like transportation, so the buses, IT as well. It would also delay the new funding formula implementation. So instead of forced consolidation, the House is now pushing for this. Merger studies, the plan in that House bill also includes specific identified school districts and mandates that they engage in studies to explore forming new unified school districts. Doesn't force anybody to do anything yet, but it asks them to at least look at which districts might be consolidated. The funding formula delay, and this is probably something that the governor will not want to see delayed, but it pushes back the implementation of that new foundational per pupil funding formula, and it pushes it back by a full 2 years. So in other words, we will not have a funding formula in place until probably 2030 at this point. And that means that potentially, depending on how school districts operate, property taxes could continue to go up. It also aims to streamline existing regional partnerships, connecting them to current supervisory unions instead of districts. And it creates a conflict, as I mentioned, with Governor Scott, who is forcing for forced large-scale consolidation of school districts to achieve significant budget savings. The debate centers on balancing the rising education costs with local control, with the House preferring a more gradual, voluntary consolidation path using those regionalized service partnerships compared to the Senate and the governor's push for more aggressive state-mandated restructuring. So unlike previous iterations with these forced mergers, H 955 abandons the mandatory school district consolidation and creates 7 regional merger groups where districts are encouraged to form committees to study and pursue voluntary unified school districts. I did have a look. There's 3 maps that were beginning to be circulated last week, and I did look at Rutland County, and it does carve up Rutland County on a, I want to say, east-west sort of basis. Some of the towns that are north of Rutland County would still be included in the Otter Valley District, but some of the districts far south would move down into the Manchester area. So a lot remains to be seen with that. But again, there will be 7 regional entities designed to help school districts share those services, such as especially special education, which is very expensive, and then the transportation, we mentioned the buses, and administrative functions to reduce duplication and overhead costs without requiring immediate structural mergers. The bill also, as I mentioned, the formula would be put out another 2 years. The current proposal for House reform from the House centers on that. It was out of the House Education Committee April 3rd, 2026. It left the House Education Committee. The vote in committee was 7 in favor and 4 against, and it was along strictly party lines. So 7 Democrats and or progressives voted for this, and 4 Republicans voted no. Governor Scott has expressed strong opposition, arguing that forced consolidation is necessary if you are going to have real cost containment, and that the House's incremental approach does not provide timely relief to taxpayers. Especially with the pushing out of the foundation formula, property taxes will continue to rise each year. The Senate, on their half, is pursuing a more aggressive plan involving a specific map of 12, instead of the 7, 12 larger supervisory unions, leading to a collision course between the 2 chambers, I'm afraid, as they attempt to reconcile their differing philosophies. So whatever emerges will probably go to a conference committee on both sides, and maybe they can hammer out the differences. And then, of course, it has to go to the governor, who, again, has made it very clear he will not sign the budget unless the educational reform is already in place. So we'll have to wait and see what the next few weeks offer to us. We are scheduled, by the way, folks, to adjourn on May 8th this year. The Vermont legislature is budgeted for 18 weeks of getting paid, and that would be May 8th would be the final day. And we probably are not going to make that date, to be perfectly honest with you. I have asked the Senate Pro Tem, and I know the Speaker of the House has been asked as well, for their best guess as to when we can adjourn. And both of them said we would probably be still going into late May. So there's a possibility that there'll be some activity still going in June. There is a veto day in the middle to the end of June. In case the governor vetoes anything, we would be called back to take that into consideration. The other thing that potentially could happen is that both education committees, the House and the Senate, would be asked to stay put in Montpelier, where the rest of the legislators would adjourn and go home, and then those two committees would continue to hammer things out. There are 6 members of the Senate Education Committee and 11 in the House. So those 20-some-odd people would be, or just short of 20, I guess, would be required to stay and hammer out the differences and get something accomplished, and then everybody would be called back to vote on it in hopefully late May. I certainly don't want to be there past that, but you never know. There have been years where we're still there in June. So that is the education piece right now. Nothing has yet been decided. And in fact, the only thing that has come out is the House version. The Senate Education Committee has not voted out a recommendation yet. They will obviously, if the full House decides to approve that. Right now, it's only gone through the House Education Committee. But if the House does vote that way, it will come over to the Senate, and the Senate Education Committee would have first crack at it to see whether they could work on it and come to an agreement. So beyond the primary focus on Act 73, and it still is, the 2026 legislative session will be addressing several other major initiatives, including significant housing, health care, and environmental reforms. The key probably is some land use reform. This has come up, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. There was a rally which was very well attended on the steps of the State House and had to do with Act 181, which was passed over a gubernatorial veto in 2024. Again, strictly on party lines. Democrats and progressives advanced the bill. Republicans voted against it. The governor vetoed the bill, and it was overridden again along party lines and went into effect in June of 2024. There has been a substantial pushback, especially from rural Vermonters, regarding Act 181. Many folks feel that it does not take into account property rights for people, especially living outside those dense urban groups. And again, we're hoping to speak with Devin Neary for the remainder of this show, but we're going to try to have him on next week to talk about that. He was and still is the executive director of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission and a supporter of Act 181, from what I can remember. I did vote against it when it was in the Senate, and I voted to agree with the governor to sustain the veto, but it didn't happen. But I realize there are certain provisions in that bill that are very good, especially for an area like Rutland City. So we talked last week with Lyle Jepson about the new hotel, the improvements across the street at the Paramount, and some other areas. Fairhaven, for instance, has a potential housing development going to happen at the old racetrack. And some of the provisions in Act 181 were very good, especially for those more densely populated areas in the state. So I'm not saying that the whole bill was a bad idea, but I do think the so-called road rule and Tier 3 proponents or provisions of that, I feel need to be repealed. We had a Senate Bill 325, which delays implementation of that, the so-called Land Use Reform Bill, for a couple of years, 2030 for the road rule, and the other piece, the Tier 3, in 28, as I recall. Municipalities calling for a slowdown, which would expand or could expand Act 250 jurisdiction in 2027. So my main objection to the bill was this, and I realize that, again, depending on where you live in Vermont, things are different. Certainly Chittenden County, which is, I don't know, primarily an urban county, but it certainly has Burlington in it and some of the larger cities. Rutland, I think, now is the sixth most populated city in the state. So we do have some urban areas, but we also have a lot of rural areas in Vermont. And what happens with this road rule is this. If you live, for instance, in an area where you have 100 acres and your family has owned that tract of land, 100 acres, for generations, and at the end of your life, you want to give each of your kids a little bit of that to build their own home on it, and they decide, as many Vermonters do, to put a house up and position it away from the main road. Well, if the driveway goes beyond 800 feet to do that, it would trigger an automatic Act 250 permit requirement. Now, I'm not saying that you can't get a permit, but it does cost money. It costs tens of thousands of dollars. There is nothing predictable about it necessarily. It sometimes takes a long time to get a permit. And again, there'd have to be a study and lawyers involved and costs involved. So many of the rural areas are pushing back because of that, because they feel that it does take away property rights of people that have lived here for generations and generations. And that's the road rule piece of that. Tier 3 is the other piece of that, where the Land Use Review Board, so-called LURB, will decide which areas of Vermont fall into Tier 1, and there are two A's and B's, so there's a Tier 1A and a Tier 1B, and then Tier 2 and Tier 3. Tier 3 will be restricted much more than the other two tiers, and most of the Tier 3 activity will require an Act 250 permit in order for any development to take place. Again, I want to be careful. It doesn't mean that you can't develop in those Tier 3 areas, but it will automatically trigger an Act 250 requirement. And sometimes it takes a short amount of time and sometimes much longer. Most of the time, it also requires a lot of expense. So people living in those areas are bristling about that, and that is the main pushback on that. So I did want to get Devin Neary's view of this, because he was on the regional, or is on the Regional Planning Commission, but was a big, I think, proponent of Act 181. We've had him on this show in the past, and he spoke highly about it. And again, there are provisions, especially in Rutland City and Fairhaven as well, where it lessens the onus, if you will, of going through an Act 250 permit. So more to come on that as we move along through the rest of the session. Senate Bill 325, which did not repeal any of the Act 181 provisions. It did push the implementation dates out a couple years, and in one case out to 2030. That's over in the House Environment Committee. And Chris Pritchard, as we discussed last week, who is running again for a House seat in that area, it's in his committee right now, and they'll be taking a look at it for the remainder of the session to decide whether they can amend it further or whether they can just concur with what the Senate did. It probably will be something that the governor will be taking a very close look at if it comes out the way it left the Senate, and indications early on were that he would veto that if it didn't have more of a repeal aspect to it. Housing and homelessness. We are working again on a homelessness response continuum in the legislature. These, by the way, if you're just joining us, are some of the issues remaining to be settled this year. in the Vermont State Legislature. This is Bill H938, if you want to look it up. It's very easy, by the way, to look up any bill that you're interested in with the topic. All you got to do is Google Vermont Legislature, click on it, it'll open it up, and then you can see bills. You can see a little area where you put a bill number in, and it'll bring that bill up, and you can see whether it is still in a committee, whether it's been approved by one House or the Senate, and what the status of the bill is. But you can go on the internet and just click on it. You'll be able to read the bill with all of the provisions in it. So this is Bill H938. It does include substantial funding, about $82.6 million for for shelters, and then also the hotel-motel placements. That those have not gone away 100%, and then permanent supportive housing, which I think many of us in the legislature are beginning to support strongly. Other key legislation includes landlord-tenant reforms. This is Bill H772. So if you're a landlord or a tenant, you might want to take a look at what that does. I have a feeling it probably splits the middle. There'll be some provisions in it which favors landlords and some additional provisions that favor tenant folks. So you may want to take a look at it. New housing production tools. This is H775, which would encourage development and manage some of the impacts of Act 181. Also left to decide are some health care cost management. Significant bill, S190, did pass the Senate. The three senators from Rutland County all voted against it. That was based on a meeting that we had at the Rutland Regional Medical Center, which has the cap on the way that the hospital would be reimbursed with Blue Cross payments. And it was asked of us that we would not support the bill. Judy Fox, the CEO at the hospital, met with the entire delegation. It has not gone over, or it has gone over to the House, but it hasn't been voted on over there yet. But the Senate did pass it. And again, the three senators from Rutland County all voted against it. But it did it was aimed in the right direction to cap hospital reimbursements for what are called qualified health plans, QHPs. And you can get reimbursement up to 250% of Medicare to reduce premium costs. Additional legislation advancing to establish a statewide prescription drug discount program. That is House Bill or H577. And that is still has not moved over to the Senate as yet, as far as I know. The other thing with the hospital situation, and this is something that every business in the state probably faces at one point or another, depending on whether you sell certain equipment or you provide certain services, there are some that don't make as much money, as much profit for that business as others. And I'll just give you an example in the hospital world. The emergency department and women's health and behavioral health don't make the hospital enough money. In other words, it costs more money to provide those services than they do get reimbursement. Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement rates are traditionally under what it costs the hospital by quite a bit, as a matter of fact. So when the hospital does a procedure and then puts in for Medicaid or Medicare reimbursement, it doesn't cover the cost of what they do. So what they do is cost shift, which means some of the other procedures that the hospital does, they charge more than it costs because they have to make up the difference, if you will, in order to get back to a level playing field. And that's why this Blue Cross cap is so important. It would be harder and in some cases impossible for a state legislature to change the federal reimbursement of Medicare or Medicaid. We can make certain tweaks to it, but we can't just outright say you got to pay 100% to the hospital as to what it costs them. But the Blue Cross piece, again, they're going to cap it at 250% reimbursement, and they need much more than that to be able to get back to a level playing field. So the end result is, if 190 goes into effect, based on the results that we had from our meeting at the Rutland Regional Medical Center, it could mean, not saying it will, but it could mean that some of the services, some of the procedures that are given to the community here in Rutland will have to be cut. And so, for instance, if you have diabetic concerns and you're on dialysis, that may mean that you have to travel to another health institution in order to get that treatment done. I hope it doesn't come to that. I'm hoping that in the end they can come to an agreement and get that so that Rutland Regional can support it. And we'll, again, wait for whatever the House does with that Senate bill. And then when it comes back, we will take a look at what has been done and decide how we vote. So those are some of the things. I'm going to take a second break here on Catamount Community Connection. Again, we had hoped to talk with Devin Neary, the executive director of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, to talk specifically about Act 181 and maybe some of the unanticipated consequences of passing that in terms of people's ability to do what they want to do with the land that they own and, in fact, have owned for generations. And we were unable to do that. Unfortunately, Devin came down with something and was not able to join us today. So we're going to hopefully get him on the program a week from today and talk more about that. And we'll take our second break here on Catamount Community Connection and be back in just a minute. And we're back here on Catamount Community Connection, our weekly 1-hour program that we air each and every weekend and across all 5 stations. You can also find it on PEG TV. Just Google PEG TV, and in the archives, you'll find Catamount Community Connection, and you can either pick by week or by topic about who we talk to that week to hear it whenever you find it convenient. So I'm Brian Collamore, your host, and again, our show is brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair in Rutland since 1846. And we're looking forward to the 180th Vermont State Fair coming up in August this summer and coinciding with the 250th birthday of our nation. So we've talked a little bit about some of the bills that have been passed and signed into law by the governor, and also some of the remaining issues that will have to be decided upon by the Vermont State Legislature. I would say, again, the number one issue left to decide is the educational reform. What are we going to do? How many districts will there be? And how are we going to pay for it? That has to be decided, according to what the governor has indicated, before he will sign a budget for fiscal year 27. So much left to do. The other big issue, I feel, based on what I'm hearing in terms of a groundswell of pushback, is Act 181, which is the land use bill that was passed over a gubernatorial veto back in 2024. The Senate advanced a bill, S-325, which pushes implementation dates out a couple of years, but it doesn't really address the fundamental problem for a lot of people who don't feel that is a good law. Next week, we've received confirmation from Devin Neary, who's unfortunately under the weather today. We're hoping to talk to him, but we are going to talk next week with Devin, and he will explain again his perspective from the Rutland Regional Rutland Regional Planning Commission, his position on that. So there's a couple of other issues that remain to be decided. One of them has to do with agriculture, and I am on the Senate Agriculture Committee. This will be my 10th year on that committee. And this year, we did focus on a rather large miscellaneous agricultural bill. We have sent that across to the House, and in return, we have had their miscellaneous bill sent back to us. The main thrust for the Senate bill was the Supreme Court decision this past summer regarding municipal authority to regulate farming activity in densely populated areas. We felt in the committee that for many years it was just assumed that farming would not be able to be municipally directed. In other words, they would not be able, by way of zoning laws or any sort of ordinances passed in a particular city or municipality that would regulate farming. The Supreme Court decided that was not the case and felt that in some instances it was proper for a municipality to be able to do that. The whole issue centered around a farm in Essex, as I recall. The farmer had ducks and grew marijuana on his property. It is perfectly legal in Vermont to grow marijuana. So he had ducks and pot, in essence. And the Supreme Court, the municipality of Essex stepped in and said, you can't have it in the middle of the city. And it was smack dab in the middle of Essex. But the Supreme Court said, based on their interpretation of the law, that the municipality could regulate that particular farm. So the Senate Agriculture took a look at it, at that whole situation. And we spent a lot of time taking testimony from the Vermont Cities and Leagues group, and also a whole bunch of stakeholders from the farming community. And we thought we came up with a pretty good interpretation to send back to the Supreme Court, that this is how we wanted the law to look. And for the most part, about 95% of what we felt was that towns and cities could not regulate farming, but in some really, really different sort of circumstances they could. In other words, if you have a half acre of land and you are a farmer and you have, I don't know, 50 to 100 pigs on it, and you cannot manage the waste that's coming off that acreage, that would be something that the municipality would be able to come in and say, this is not, what we want to have in our downtown area, basically. So that's the way the whole thing eventuated. The House sent back an interesting, I'm going to call it a complimentary bill, that the General Assembly found that since the enactment of the 2004 Acts and Resolves, which included the so-called required agricultural practices, that municipalities lack authority to regulate farming or the construction of farm structures. And they put their own bill together and basically agreed with the Senate's version, although theirs is a little bit different. It does allow for poultry to be raised in downtown areas, as long, again, as it is being done in the proper way, taking care of the waste that might accumulate there. And it all has to do with acreage as well. So for a long time, if you had an acre or more, you were okay. You were definitely a farm, and the municipality could not come in and tell you how to farm. If you were under that, there were certain times, as I mentioned with, for instance, a pig farm, where that was proper. So we sent ours over to the Senate, or to the House, and the House sent their bill over to us. And the next few weeks will be spent with each of them taking a look at the other's bill to decide whether they want to amend it, in other words, change it in any way, or pass it the way it came over and then send it back. We didn't get 100% concurrence on ours with the stakeholders that represent the farming community, and then VLCT, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. We're still a little bit far apart. We also had at one point a monetary threshold that if you had $2,500, which was the old way, that you got from farming, anything under that you would not be able to basically regulate it. Anything over that you would. The folks from Vermont League of Cities and Towns wanted that increased to $10,000 a year. We compromised at $5,000. So if a farmer makes $5,000 or more, they would come under the required agricultural practices. So again, much to be gleaned in the next few weeks on that. And then the last issue that I'll mention is the budgetary focus. I mentioned the Budget Adjustment Act, which is a truing up of the previous year's fiscal budget, has already been signed and passed into law by the governor. but lawmakers are now working to pass the fiscal year FY27 budget, which came across as H951. So probably folks may not realize that anything having to do with money starts in the House. That's the way it is. So any taxation, any fees, and any budgetary, any appropriations has to start in the House, and then they send it over. And the Senate Finance Committee on our side, and then Appropriations looks at what the House Ways and Means Committee and their Appropriations Committee did, and either, again, changes it or compares it to the governor's recommended budget, and then makes some more adjustments and sends it back. There's usually a conference committee, and then the governor has a choice whether to approve it with his signature, let it become law without it, or veto it. But this year, H951, and again, it's a very long bill, but you can look it up, because of what the Ways and Means Committee did. And what happened there was that the governor proposed using $105 million of one-time money to buy down the property tax rate. It was going to be up around 12%. If we used the $105 million, it would come down to about 3, maybe 3.5%, 4%. But the House decided to split it and take $54 million or whatever the difference is and spend it this year to buy it down and then leave $54 for next year. And it resulted in about a potential 7% average increase in property taxes. So it will be interesting to see what Senate Finance, or rather the Senate Appropriations, well, both actually, both Senate Finance and Senate Appropriations does with either it's going to be a 7% increase or 3%. And of course, the governor has the final say whether or not he approves the budget in the end, or lets it become law without his signature, or indeed vetoes it. So those are some of the things left to do. I am very much hoping that we can adjourn by May 8th. We probably won't, and we won't get a budget until the education piece is figured out. So with that in mind, I hope to have Devin Neary on with us next week. And in the meantime, I thank you for listening. Please get a hold of me if you have any questions, and we will see all of you next week on Catamount Community Connection.